Hello, welcome to another episode of the History Inquirer. Today, I'll be taking a break from my Colonial America series to bring you another pirate episode. Arr, you landlubbers! Specifically, I'll be talking about the Buccaneers, privateers, and pirates of the 1660s, including the King of the Buccaneers, Captain Henry Morgan. So kick back, relax, and grab a pint of grog as I tell you the tale of Captain Henry Morgan and the Buccaneers. Speaking of grog, I'm having some today. Very refreshing. The recipe, if you are so interested, is 4 parts water, 1 part rum. Now, you could use any rum or even whiskey if you like, but seeing how this episode is about Captain Henry Morgan, of course I had to use Captain Morgan's spiced Jamaican rum. Gotta have it. And then after that, 2 teaspoons of sugar and a lime or 2. Like I said, very refreshing on a hot summer's day, whether you're out at sea, plundering the seas, or down here in sunny, hot, humid South Carolina. Like I am. Anyways, if you're wondering about the flag behind me and why it's not the skull and crossbones, this is the King's colors, or the original British flag, and the reason why it's not the skull and crossbones that I have up here is because Captain Henry Morgan was a privateer. He was fighting for the English crown. He, till the day he died, he always maintained that he was an English patriot, fighting for the English against the Spanish. Okay, but what is a privateer or a buccaneer, and how is that different from a regular pirate like Blackbeard? Glad you asked. So, a privateer is a legal pirate. Like a mercenary on the high seas, granted a letter of marque by a government like England to attack their enemies in return for the plunder that they captured. So basically, England grants a private individual or group permission to pillage and plunder their enemies on their behalf. That is a privateer. A buccaneer, on the other hand, is an adventurer pirate in the West Indies who preyed on Spanish settlements and shipping during the mid to latter half of the 17th century. The term comes from the French boucan, which was a grill for smoking meat, such as the first buccaneers were hunters in Western Hispaniola, or what is now Haiti. So basically, they were doing barbecue. Oh, that's the early form of it. Anyways, the island of Tortuga, which you may remember from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, was a famous or infamous haven for them and was under the control of the French during this time. The colonial government of Tortuga was very liberal or loose when it came to granting letters of marque and tolerating the Buccaneers because they brought the colony money, though at the expense of the Spanish. The Buccaneers and privateers differ from pirates like Blackbeard in that they are not enemies of all nations. They committed acts of piracy for sure, but only against the Spanish, whereas the pirates of Blackbeard's day did not care who a ship belonged to. Now, some of the early Buccaneers were people like the Dutchman Malcolm Siciliano and the Frenchman Francois Launay. I'll probably pronounce that right. However, they were not organized into a major fighting force, like they would be under Captain Henry Morgan. Henry Morgan was born in Wales in 1635 to a prosperous farming family. In 1654, he joined an expedition to attack the Spanish in the West Indies. In 1655, he helped take the island of Jamaica for the English. Beginning in 1658, Henry would serve under the privateer Christopher Mings and would partake in attacks against Spanish settlements in Cuba and Mexico. In due time, he and some comrades of his acquired a ship of their own and made him captain. He would take several Spanish ships before joining up with an older pirate named Mansvelt, who made Henry vice admiral of his fleet of 15 ships. With this fleet, they seized the Isle of St. Catherine and made an attempt on Spanish towns and villages in Costa Rica and Panama. However, the governor received word of this and assembled a force to drive the pirates out. Thus, Henry Morgan and Mansvelt returned to St. Catherine and ultimately to Jamaica. But he would be back. By he, I mean Captain Henry Morgan. So in 1660, Henry Morgan's uncle, Edward, was made lieutenant governor of the island, and his daughter, Mary, Henry's cousin, was married to Henry in 1665. In 1666, Henry Morgan took the town of Portobello in spite of the fierce resistance of the Spanish. In taking the town, he forced priests, nuns, and other prisoners to be used as human shields. Afterwards, the town's inhabitants were forced to pay a ransom of 100,000 pesos, and the governor of Panama was forced to contribute more money after Captain Morgan and his Buccaneers defeated an army of 3,000 men. When the Buccaneers left the town for Jamaica, they left with 250,000 pesos, in addition to cloth, silk, linen, and other goods. When he returned to Jamaica, he was hailed as a hero and made the leader of the Buccaneers. He also acquired sugar plantations on the island, making him one of the wealthiest and most influential people on the island. And also, of course, he was married to the lieutenant governor's daughter. So there's that. The Buccaneers who sailed with him were a diverse bunch, with many of them being French, Dutch, Walloon, English, and also a few Welsh, Irish, Scottish, Italian, and Portuguese, and African mixed in. In 1669, Captain Morgan was made Commander-in-Chief of all armed forces in Jamaica, in addition to his previous titles of King of the Privateers and Admiral. He also attacked the towns of Puerto Príncipe, otherwise known as Camagüey today, and Santiago in Cuba. Following this, he attacked Maracaibo on the coast of Venezuela. He took the fort and looted the town. However, three Spanish warships entered the harbor and trapped him there. In response, Henry Morgan took a captured merchant ship and packed it full of gunpowder, brimstone, and tarred palm leaves, with painted logs for cannons and wooden sailors for crew. 12 men sailed the ship at night towards the enemy flagship, the 48-gun Magdalene. When the time was right, the sailors lit the fuses and escaped into the darkness. It wasn't long before, boom! The Spanish flagship was caught on fire, another ship was captured by the pirates. The third ship ran aground. The Buccaneers then left the town and returned home to Jamaica with another 250,000 pesos of loot to drink, feast, celebrate the victory with gambling and prostitutes. Blowing all the money and then heading back out again to make more. In 1670, Captain Morgan, with 2,000 men and 38 ships under his command, decided to hit his next target, Panama City. His reputation in New Spain was so great by this time that when the garrison learned of his approach, 2/3 deserted out of fear. In 1671, Henry Morgan's Buccaneers, who were well coordinated and disciplined, beat the Spanish forces and captured the city. However, the Spanish were able to remove most of the valuables beforehand and burn the city so that not much was left. However, it is not certain who actually started the fire, and there are sources that say that Captain Morgan did it. One of them being Alexander Exquemelin, who was there. However, he's kind of biased against Captain Morgan, so kind of take that with a grain of salt. We don't actually know exactly who started the fire. But what we do know is that it angered his men, especially with the lack of loot. However, there's another problem, and that is that England and France had already signed a peace treaty. So Morgan's actions were considered illegal in act of piracy. So in 1672, in order to appease the Spanish, he was arrested and sent back to England. Although there are no records of him ever being in prison for his crimes. Matter of fact, he was just there chilling in England and hobnobbing with high society and the aristocrats and nobles and whoever else. And 2 years later, in 1674, he was knighted by King Charles II and made Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica, like his uncle Edward before him. So the capital of Jamaica at this time, Port Royal, was very rich and prosperous and boasted 100 taverns, as well as gaming houses and brothels. Sin City, in other words. Henry Morgan, as Lieutenant Governor, though he did not do anything to clean up the town, he did improve the town's defenses. He spent his time drinking, telling war stories, and running his estates, or his plantations, rather. He passed away in 1688 at the age of 53, possibly due to tuberculosis or alcoholism. He was given a burial with full military honors. However, in 1692, an earthquake would strike the city of Port Royal, and part of the town was sundered beneath the waves, including the grave of Captain Henry Morgan. Captain Morgan and his Buccaneers of this area left behind an enduring legacy both in history and especially in pop culture. We have sports teams named after them and drinks like Captain Morgan's Spice Rum. There are also films and TV shows like Pirates of the Caribbean and, of course, Captain Blood, and then you got Black Sails. That's based off of later pirates like Blackbeard. There's Captain Blood and everything else. Buccaneer Body. The pirates and buccaneers of this era also had an impact on the American colonies. The port towns of New York, Charleston, Virginia, Rhode Island, etc. tolerated the pirates because they provided a source of income and exotic goods, like they did in Tortuga and Jamaica. As time went on, though, popular attitudes turned against the pirates, especially after 1713, when the pirates began attacking British ships and even blockading the port of Charleston by one Edward Blackbeard Teach. The British also began cracking down on the Buccaneers and pirates at this time, and their life faded away, except during times of war. However, like I said, the legacy remains. However, stories like that of Blackbeard and Charles Vane and Calico Jack Rackham and Henry Avery and all the rest, and then Bonnie Married, that's a story for another time. Thank you all for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Make some grog. Read some pirate stories. Watch the films and TV shows. And I'll see you all next time on the History Inquirer. Thank you.